Hello Year 12s and welcome to this video on the principles of justice. There are three things that you need to do while you're watching this video. The first thing is to take the very best Cornell notes that you can. The second thing is to use the pause and rewind functions. Use the pause function if you need to stop this video so that you can take notes. Use the rewind function if you feel you've missed out on any information and you need to go back over that information. And the third thing that you need to do is have your vocabulary sheets open in front of you so that you can include in your vocabulary sheets the definitions of any important terms as well as the definitions of any other words that you might not be familiar with. Once you've finished watching this video, please read the pages from the textbook referred to on this slide. And if you find any additional information in that reading that you think is useful, make sure that you include that information in your Cornell notes. Let's get started then. Here is our learning intention. Please write this learning intention in your Cornell notes. By the end of this video, you should be able to explain the three principles of justice, which are fairness, equality, and access. These principles are very important principles which we'll keep on coming back to as we work our way through Unit 3. In particular, in this outcome, that is outcome 1, we will be evaluating the extent to which the Victorian criminal justice system achieves these three principles of justice during a criminal case. And in outcome 2, we will be evaluating the extent to which the Victorian civil justice system achieves these principles of justice during a civil dispute. In this video, we are going to define each of the principles of fairness, equality, and access, and I am going to demonstrate the application of these three principles of justice, largely by considering how the use of the judge, jury, and lawyers in the Victorian criminal justice system contributes to the achievement of these principles of justice. As I've said, in outcome 1, we will be evaluating the extent to which the Victorian criminal justice system achieves fairness, equality, and access during a criminal case. Over the course of outcome 1, we will largely be doing this in the context of these 8 features of the Victorian criminal justice system that we look at as part of the Legal Studies study design. As I've also said, in outcome 2, we will be evaluating the extent to which the Victorian civil justice system achieves fairness, equality, and access during a civil dispute. Over the course of outcome 2, we will largely be doing this in the context of these 9 features of the Victorian civil justice system that we look at as part of the Legal Studies study design. The important task word here is evaluate. For all of these features of the legal system, you will need to be able to evaluate the extent to which that feature achieves the principles of justice. There are 3 key parts to an evaluation. First, an evaluation requires an opinion in which you express your view about the extent to which the relevant feature of the legal system achieves the principles of justice. This could be, for example, a large extent, a significant extent, a reasonable extent, a moderate extent, or a small extent. You must include in your opinion a short reason for your view. Second, an evaluation requires a discussion in which you weigh up how the relevant feature of the legal system contributes to the achievement of the principles of justice against how that feature detracts from the achievement of the principles of justice, that is, against limitations on the ability of that feature to achieve the principles of justice. In this discussion, you must use words such as however, on the other hand, in contrast, while, and whereas. Third, an evaluation requires a conclusion in which you sum up your view. In class, I will give you a lot of practice in evaluating. On this slide, I will set out some very important points that you need to keep in mind whenever you are answering a SAC or exam question that relates to the principles of justice. The first point is that a SAC or exam question might specifically refer to the principles of justice or to one or more of the principles of justice. For example, the question might require you to evaluate the extent to which jury trials achieve the principles of justice, or to discuss one factor that could affect the ability of the criminal justice system to achieve fairness. However, these are not the only types of questions in which the principles of justice may be relevant. In particular, a question that asks you to evaluate or discuss the extent to which a particular feature of the legal system, such as plea negotiations, achieves justice, is really asking you to evaluate or discuss the extent to which that feature of the legal system achieves the principles of justice. And so you would answer that question using the concepts of fairness, equality, and access. In addition, referring to the principles of justice is a good way to add detail to your answer to a question. For instance, you could answer a question that requires you to describe or explain a purpose of plea negotiations by including in your description or explanation how that purpose achieves fairness, equality, or access. The second point is that when answering a principles of justice question, there are specific trigger words that you should try to use to link the point you are making to the relevant principle of justice. For example, as I'll show you a little later, trigger words for the principle of access include understanding rights. So, if a question asked you to discuss the extent to which the use of a lawyer contributes to the achievement of the principles of justice, one of the points that you could make is that having a lawyer contributes to the achievement of access because a lawyer will advise an accused of their rights, such as their right to silence, and so the accused will understand their rights. Can you see how I have linked lawyers and access by using the trigger words understanding rights? As we look at each principle of justice, I will explain the applicable trigger words. Now, it will not always be possible or relevant to use the trigger words, but you should try to use them wherever possible. The third point follows on from this. The trigger words are also important because there is some overlap between the principles of justice and because a particular feature of the legal system can sometimes achieve two or more of the principles of justice. This is an important point to bear in mind where a SAC or exam question requires you to answer that question by reference to a specific principle of justice. For example, the question might ask you to describe how the role of the judge achieves fairness. As you will see soon, the trigger words for fairness include reasonable opportunity to present a case. So you could answer this question by saying that where an accused is self-represented, that is, unrepresented in the sense that they do not have a lawyer, the judge can contribute to the achievement of fairness by explaining to the accused the legal procedure and legal terminology that applies in the case. In this way, the accused will be given a reasonable opportunity to present their case because they will be able to understand the relevant legal procedure and legal terminology. However, if the SAC or exam question asked you to describe how the role of the judge achieves equality, then you would not use the trigger words reasonable opportunity to present a case, as they are associated with fairness, not equality. Again, as you will see soon, the trigger words for equality include disadvantage. So the way you would answer this question about the role of the judge and equality is by writing that where an accused is self-represented, that is, represented that is, unrepresented in the sense that they do not have a lawyer, the judge can contribute to the achievement of equality by explaining to the accused the legal procedure and legal terminology that applies in the case. This is because the prosecution will be represented by a lawyer, and so a self-represented accused will be at a disadvantage, as, unlike the lawyer for the prosecution, an unrepresented accused is unlikely to understand this legal procedure and legal terminology unless it is explained to them. And here is how you would answer the question if it asked you to describe how the role of the judge achieves access, using the words enforcing rights and pursuing a case, which, as you will see in a moment, are trigger words for access. Where an accused is self-represented, that is, unrepresented in the sense that they do not have a lawyer, the judge can contribute to the achievement of access by explaining to the accused the legal procedure and legal terminology that applies in the case. As a result of being able to understand the legal procedure and legal terminology, the accused will be able to better enforce their rights and pursue their case. In all of these cases, we are looking at the role of the judge in assisting a self-represented accused, but by using different trigger words, we can answer the question in the context of fairness, equality, or access, depending on what the question requires. This is really important because if the question is about fairness, for example, and you answer it using equality or access language, then you are not actually answering the question, and so you will not get the marks. The fourth point is that you need to think strategically. Some features of the legal system are one-sided in the sense that they only contribute to the achievement of the principles of justice. For example, the requirement that the judge must be independent in the sense that the judge must not have any connection with the prosecution or the accused is a very important role of the judge. It ensures that the judge should treat the prosecution and the accused in the same way, and so contributes to the achievement of equality. You could therefore use this role to answer a SAC or exam question that required you to outline, describe, or explain a role of the judge that achieves a principle of justice. However, this would not be a sensible role to choose if the SAC or exam question asked you to analyse, discuss, or evaluate the extent to which a role of the judge achieves one or more principles of justice. This is because an analysis, discussion, or evaluation requires you to consider both sides. In this case, both how the role of the judge that you have chosen contributes to the achievement of the principles of justice, and how that role detracts from, that is, does not achieve or is limited in achieving the principles of justice. The requirement that the judge must be independent certainly contributes to the achievement of equality, but it does not detract from the achievement of any principle of justice. Instead, to answer a question that asks you to analyse, discuss, or evaluate the extent to which a role of the judge achieves one or more principles of justice, you need to choose a double-sided role, that is, a role of the judge that can both contribute to and detract from the achievement of the principles of justice. For instance, you could choose the role of the judge in assisting a self-represented accused that we've just looked at. This contributes to the achievement of the principles of justice because it means that the accused is able to understand the applicable legal procedure and legal terminology, which, as we've seen, contributes to the achievement of fairness, equality, and access. However, this role of the judge is also limited in achieving the principles of justice because even though the judge is an experienced lawyer, the judge cannot assist a self-represented accused by suggesting the evidence that the accused should present or by suggesting a possible defense that the accused might have. If the accused overlooks important evidence or is not aware of a possible defense, then this might result in an unfair verdict. This is a limitation on this role of the judge in achieving fairness. The fifth point is that there are many aspects of the legal system that you can talk about in the context of the principles of justice. Rather than learning them all, you might prefer to concentrate on those aspects that give you The fifth point is that there are many aspects of the legal system that you can talk about in the context of the principles of justice. Rather than learning them all, you might prefer to concentrate on those aspects that give you scope for an in-depth analysis rather than a superficial analysis. For example, one role of the parties in a criminal case, that is the prosecution and the accused, is to attend and participate in the trial of the accused. However, there's not a lot you can say about this, so choose something with more meat, such as the role of a party being to participate in the selection of a jury for the trial of the accused by the use of challenges for cause and peremptory challenges. This gives you scope to analyse how this role contributes to fairness, it enables the parties to object to jurors who might be biased, and how this role detracts from fairness. The use of peremptory challenges may result in the jury not being truly representative of the community, which can result in an unfair verdict. The sixth and final point is that the number of principles of justice that you need to refer to in answering a SAC or exam question is dependent on both the question and the marks that are allocated to the question. If the question asks you to refer to one principle of justice, then choose the principle of justice that gives you most scope for answering the question in the detail that is appropriate to the allocated marks. State at the beginning of your answer the principle of justice you have chosen and, to the extent relevant, use trigger words that apply to that principle of justice and not to another principle of justice. One means one, and you must be very careful that your answer does not slide into a second principle of justice by using language that applies to another principle of justice. So, for example, if the question asks you for one principle of justice and you identify fairness as the principle of justice that you will use, but then slip into equality or access language, you will have referred to two principles of justice in your answer, not one principle of justice as required by the question, and so you will only be marked on so much of your answer as relates to the first principle of justice that you have mentioned, in this case, fairness. Similarly, if the question asks you to refer to two principles of justice, clearly state the two principles of justice you have chosen and make sure that you confine your answer to those two principles only. If the question asks you to refer to principles of justice, then you must answer the question using more than one principle of justice. Principles is plural. Whether you refer to 2 or 3 principles depends on the marks. For a 10-mark question, you should refer to all 3 principles of justice, although not necessarily in the same detail. If the question asks you to refer to principles of justice, then you must answer the question using more than one principle of justice. Principles is plural. Whether you refer to 2 or 3 principles of justice depends on the marks. For a 10-mark question, you should refer to all 3 principles of justice, although not necessarily in the same depth. For anything up to and including 8 marks, 2 principles of justice is fine unless the question expressly requires you to use all 3 principles of justice. I know that this is quite a lengthy introduction, but these 6 points are absolutely critical. We can now look at each of the 3 principles of justice and the trigger words that are associated with them. The first principle of justice is fairness. Fairness means that all people can participate in the justice system and its processes should be Fairness means that all people can participate in the justice system and its processes should be impartial and open. Look down the left-hand side of your vocabulary sheets, find the term fairness and write this definition in there. Make sure that you highlight the words in bold red italicized type. The trigger words for the principle of fairness are therefore reasonable opportunity to present a case and impartial or unbiased. Let me illustrate this. Consider the role of the judge in summarizing the case for the jury at the end of the trial, including by identifying relevant evidence. We can say that this role contributes to the achievement of fairness because, by summarizing the evidence for the jury, the judge helps ensure that each party has a reasonable opportunity to have their case considered by the jury. This is a way of participating in the justice system as referred to in the definition of fairness. Now, consider the use of a jury in the trial of an accused to listen to the evidence and decide the verdict where the accused pleads not guilty to an indictable offence. We can say that the use of a jury in these circumstances contributes to the achievement of fairness because, as a result of the jurors being randomly selected from the Victorian electoral roll, the jury is less likely to be biased. This is an example of an impartial process as referred to in the definition of fairness. You'll remember that the definition of fairness refers not only to the ability of people to participate in the justice system and to the need for the processes used in the justice system to be impartial, but also to the need for those processes to be open. One example of this is that most court proceedings are open to the public so that the media can report on the proceedings and the general public can watch the proceedings. This contributes to the achievement of fairness because if court proceedings are open, then there is less risk that the judge will treat a party unfairly, as that unfairness is likely to be publicised, which will damage the judge's reputation and might ultimately lead to the judge being considered unfit to continue as a judge. Finally, you need to remember that fairness also has its ordinary meaning, which is quite broad and goes beyond a party having a reasonable opportunity to present their case, that case being decided in an impartial or unbiased way, and the use of open processes. For example, one role of the jury is to decide the verdict in the trial of an accused based only on the evidence given at trial. This role contributes to the achievement of fairness because it is fair that the verdict should only be decided based on evidence that has been tested in court through cross-examination. Likewise, an accused's right not to give evidence at their trial, that is their right to silence, contributes to the achievement of fairness because it is consistent with the presumption of innocence. It is fair that an accused has the benefit of the presumption of innocence. These are examples of features of the legal system that contribute to the achievement of fairness where fair has its ordinary meaning. This brings us to the second principle of justice, which is equality. Equality means that all people engaging with the justice system and its processes should be treated in the same way. However, if the same treatment creates disparity or disadvantage, equality means that adequate measures should be implemented to allow all people to engage with the justice system without disparity or disadvantage. Look down the left-hand side of your vocabulary sheets, find the term equality and write this definition in there. Make sure that you highlight the words in bold red italicized type. Put another way, the starting point for equality is that all people are treated the same. But if that same treatment disadvantages some people, then equality means that this disadvantage must be removed by treating those people differently. The trigger words for the principle of equality are therefore treated in the same way or treated equally and disadvantage. Let me illustrate this. Consider the requirement that the judge must be independent, in the sense that the judge must not have any connection with the prosecution or the accused. We can say that this role of a judge contributes to the achievement of equality because it means that the judge should treat the prosecution and the accused in the same way. This is an example of achieving equality through treating people, in this case the prosecution and the accused, the same. Now, consider the role of the judge in assisting a self-represented accused to understand the legal procedure and legal terminology that applies in the case. We can say that this role of the judge contributes to the achievement of equality because the prosecution will be represented by a lawyer, and so a self-represented accused will be at a disadvantage as, unlike the lawyer for the prosecution, an unrepresented accused is unlikely to understand this legal procedure and legal terminology unless it is explained to them. Put another way, if the prosecution and the self-represented accused were treated in the same way, then this would disadvantage the self-represented accused because, unlike the prosecution lawyer, the self-represented accused is unlikely to understand the legal procedure and legal terminology that applies in the case. The judge removes this disadvantage by explaining this legal procedure and legal terminology to the self-represented accused. This is an example of achieving equality by treating people, in this case the prosecution and the self-represented accused, differently so as to remove a disadvantage that results from them being treated the same. We now come to the third and final principle of justice, which is access. Access means that all people should be able to engage with the justice system and its processes on an informed basis. Look down the left-hand side of your vocabulary sheets, find the term access and write this definition in there. Make sure that you highlight the words in bold red italicized type. The trigger words for the principle of access are therefore understanding rights, understanding a case, enforcing rights, and pursuing a case. Let me illustrate this. One of the reasons an accused needs a lawyer is because a lawyer will advise the accused of their rights, such as their right to silence. We can say that having a lawyer contributes to the achievement of access because this will enable the accused to understand their rights. Next, the fact that there is a jury present in the trial of an accused who has pleaded not guilty to an indictable offence means that the judge and lawyers must use plain English rather than legal jargon in the courtroom so that the jury can understand the case. We can say that having a jury contributes to the achievement of access because a consequence of this is that the accused will also be able to understand the case against them. And finally, having a lawyer to represent an accused in court contributes to the achievement of access because it means that the accused is able to enforce their rights and pursue their case, including by defending themselves against the charges. Let's now look at a slightly more complicated chain of reasoning relating to access. One of the roles of the judge is to manage the trial of an accused by giving directions, such as a direction about how evidence is to be given. The purpose of the judge being able to give directions of this kind is to ensure that the trial is conducted efficiently, which will reduce the time that the trial takes and therefore will reduce the legal fees that the accused has to pay their lawyer. We can say that this role of the judge in managing the trial by giving directions contributes to the achievement of access because it means that the accused is less likely to run out of money to pay their lawyer, which in turn means that the accused will be able to continue to have a lawyer who will be able to advise the accused about their rights and who will be able to enforce the accused's rights and pursue the accused's case by defending the accused in court. This chain of reasoning is a little more complicated, but can you see how we can tie it back to the principle of access using the relevant trigger words? Finally, you need to remember that access also has its ordinary meaning, which is quite broad and goes beyond a party, in this case the accused, understanding their rights or the case, enforcing their rights, and pursuing their case. For example, consider again the role of the judge in managing the trial of an accused by giving directions. As I've said, the purpose of the judge being able to give directions is to ensure that the trial is conducted efficiently. This will reduce the time that the trial takes, which will then free up the time and resources of the court to deal with other criminal cases. We can say that this role of the judge in managing the trial by giving directions contributes to the achievement of access because, by getting the accused's trial over and done with more quickly, it increases the access of the parties in these other cases to the legal system. And here are some other examples. Enabling victims in sexual and family violence offence cases to give evidence using alternative arrangements, for example, giving evidence from behind a screen, increases the access of these victims to the criminal justice system because they are more likely to be able or willing to give evidence. The fact that Victoria Legal Aid offices are located in a variety of locations across Victoria provides access to accused and victims who live in non-metropolitan and rural areas. And by providing free legal advice over the telephone or web chat to accused and victims, Victoria Legal Aid provides access to this advice to accused and victims who are unable to visit a Victoria Legal Aid office in person. These are all examples of features of the legal system that contribute to the achievement of access where access has its ordinary meaning. Well, that brings us to the end of this video. As a result of watching and taking notes on this video, you should now be able to explain the three principles of justice, which are fairness, equality, and access. As we go through the course, you will have plenty of practice in describing, explaining, analysing, discussing, and evaluating the features of the Victorian criminal and civil justice systems in the context of these principles of justice. The only thing you now have to do is to read the pages of the textbook referred to on the first slide. And if you find any additional information in that reading which you think is useful, then please supplement your Cornell notes with that additional information. Thank you for your attention.